Hi, I'm Grady Culhane in the CapeCod.com News Center. Welcome to Sunday Journal. I'm joined today by CEO and President of the Housing Assistance Corporation, Alisa Magnotta. Thank you for joining me for this conversation. There's a lot of awesome stuff going on at HAC, but namely we have a big move that has been in the works for quite some time. Do you mind give us a quick update about how things have been going? You mentioned that just today there's some stuff going over the bridges actually, so we're hot in the middle of it. Can you give us an update?
Yeah, I have so many updates for you, Grady. Thank you for continuing to be interested in our work and helping us tell our story. So, remembering back from our last conversation, really every conversation that we have a housing shortage that's created an affordability issue for people who make under $200,000 a year, households that make under $200,000 a year. That has a detrimental impact on our economy, detrimental impact on schools, detrimental impact on small businesses, and really our community overall. And so we're seeing those negative impacts of not having enough housing come to fruition after several years of being low on inventory. We're seeing a higher homeless population and aged homeless population. So we knew that we needed to upgrade our individual shelter so that it could have accessibility for the residents and clients who stay there. We knew we were having an increase in family homelessness, and so we knew we needed to expand our shelter capacity. At the same time, our staff has been growing. Our programs and services and offerings have been growing. And so we've really outgrown the space that we're in at 460 West Main as our main headquarters. And so several years ago, kind of all of these problems were brewing, and I started working on longer term solutions and property acquisitions that could help us solve multiple problems at the same time. And, along with this idea that we need housing, and I have to keep our company really focused on building housing in the right places where it's environmentally friendly and at a scale that's acceptable to the towns that they're in, the locations that they're going in, but adding inventory nonetheless. So, backing up to your question, what are kind of those big picture updates that we have? So we are moving our headquarters, right? We're moving from 460 West Main to 255 Independence. And for those who have been on the Cape for a long time, 255 Independence is that Addicts Independence corner across from Home Depot, kitty corner from the Coop that used to be the VNA headquarters. So we are moving into that building, and we're moving actually this week, Friday, where our offices are closed. Monday, our offices are closed, so that we can complete the move. And we are all just giddy about it. I mean, it is really, really exciting. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to keep working and doing, everything that you normally do while you're moving. But the opportunity to have such a prominent building that is substantial and really gives us a space to spread out and have meetings and trainings and invite people in is really, really exciting for us and for our staff. It's a very professional building, and really just levels up our operation and gives us that prominence and significance that we feel, we contribute to the community at that level. So very, very excited about that. That's coming. We are moving the individual shelter that's on Winter Street now to the 460 building. That will come probably later in 2025, early 2026. There's still a lot of work that has to be done, including hiring the architects, including going out to neighbors and getting input of their concerns and putting mitigation efforts in place. But this has been before I started working at Housing Assistance. This was a goal of the town of Hyannis. The town council was very, very adamant when I first started. The town leadership was very adamant when I started to do something to mitigate the negative impact that the shelter guests can sometimes have on a tourist, the businesses down Main Street. And so Catholic Charities took over running the operation of of the shelter when I started back in 2017, and they've done a phenomenal job. They've done a really, really good job of really reducing any kind of incidents with their shelter guests, and making sure that we work with police and we work with the businesses. If there is a problem, everybody's very proactive. But what we do know is that we have been in that shelter since 1976, if you can believe it. So it needs renovations. There's multiple flights of stairs. There's a lot of issues that we can't solve for and keep the shelter operating. So we really needed to look for a building that was more accessible to people that have mobility issues, that was more accessible for safety and fire, and getting people in and out of the building, as well as expanding the programming, right? This is the real motivation and impetus for this, from my perspective and my partner's perspective, was having co-located services so that the shelter guests don't have to move around so much through the community to go get food, to go get Duffy medical services, right? The idea is to have it one-stop shopping, to have it all there. That is the best practice. And that is the goal of this shelter. So that's on its way. The move of our headquarters and the shelter are kind of interconnected, but both are huge projects that have taken me 5-6 years to get to this point, and 2025 is our year to really move the needle and get those across the finish line, which is exciting.
Mhm. Something I wanted to ask about as well was just you mentioned the localized nature and trying to kind of like minimize like how much movement has to go on. I think that my understanding, and just wanted to check with you as well, is that if you're having issues with finding a regular home, you're probably also having issues with transportation too, when it comes to like a car and whatnot. Is that something that kind of factors in as well for these people?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. If they have a car, they're living in it, right? Like that, there's very few people. There are people at the shelter who work and live at the shelter, and they'll use public transportation. But for the most part, if somebody is homeless and they have a car, they're usually going to live in the car before they're going to check into, a shelter. Depends on the weather, depends on a lot of other factors. I don't want to completely generalize, but you can imagine that scenario just from your own personal self-interest, right? Like if you had no place to go and you had a car, you're going to stay in the car.
Mm.
So, in fact, our homeless outreach team, I think the numbers are that I last saw, we have 160 people in the Cape that are living outside or in vehicles right now. So oftentimes, our best solution for people is to give them a blanket, wool socks, things to help keep them warm, and to do check-ins. We just don't have enough shelter capacity, enough funding, enough hotel capacity to really be able to bring all of these people inside, unfortunately. So that's the nature of like not having enough inventory and the right kind of inventory. Many of these people work. And several of them are also over the age, 60 and 65. So we have a high aged population that are homeless. And in fact, one of my colleagues just reported in the past month that they had a 90-year-old who was living in their car. Best solution that they had. No family, no friends around anymore. Best solution they had was to stay in their car. So thankfully we found them. Thankfully we can, help get them services. But it is dire straits out there, and we have to be focused on the lower end, if you will, on the homeless and the most fragile, as well as adding the inventory for home ownership and rentals. So we're looking across the whole spectrum of housing at our company.
Now, as well, last time you were on, as well, you mentioned speaking of like that. I don't want to say missing middle necessarily, but like that kind of more the homeownership opportunities and rental opportunities. What? So you mentioned that the older properties that you guys have might then become like
Yeah.
not moving some of the services out of those. You can then put them on the market. Can you talk a little bit? Is that still the plan? Can you elaborate more?
Oh yeah, 100%. So the third project is that Love Lane shelter in Dennis, the family shelter. So we're fully through town permitting now. We are working with DEP on our wastewater permit. That should be in hand in the next couple of weeks. So we're really looking at a move-in of early February, which would be the consolidation of our other family shelters into this one new location. And then those family shelters would turn into, like you're saying, this market rate or open housing. And so absolutely 100%, that's still our plan, is to use those existing shelters as housing. And those details are still forthcoming because it's a little bit, you don't want to get too far ahead of yourself. I'm a big believer in not counting your chickens until your eggs are hatched. And so we've got an idea that's coming to fruition. We have 2-bedroom apartments. They're going to turn into market rate housing that's affordable. It's not market rate like that you can actually get at top of the market, right? They're for our population and our clients. So we're calling it market rate just so that there's understanding there's no deed restriction on it. And then we have a hotel, motel that we own that currently operates as a family shelter that will turn into permanent supportive housing out in the Falmouth area. And then we have a larger home that we're talking to some individuals or different companies about renting it for workforce housing or another nonprofit for housing for their population. So a
Mhm.
couple things still, in play there. And then the Winter Street shelter also I know is of great interest to people. What are we going to do with that? That again is that scenario. It will be housing. What kind of housing? I'm not sure at this moment. We're going to look at our funding sources, look at zoning, but we are leaning towards workforce housing or a short-term, seasonal workforce housing. So we're looking at a couple different models right now, and to see what's the best output or best use of that building.
So actually something I wanted to ask about later was like trying to figure out the decision making between like how much like how you define like workforce housing and like how do you even like judge that essentially like how do you report on that and then also like how much does that weigh versus I guess like regular housing. But before we got any further, you mentioned the Love Lane location. I just want to ask a little bit more for people who might have missed the previous time you were on. Can you tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about the amenities and the services you were planning to offer? There was like a conversation about like classes and stuff. Can you just highlight a
Yeah.
little bit more for us?
Right. So it's a 79 room or 79 family shelter. And as part of the shelter experience, it is really helping families get trained up to become productive in society again, to get rehoused and be productive on their own, independent. It's not a long-term shelter. They're not intended to be there really longer than a year. Some of those regulations you're probably hearing about from the governor is even shortening the stays more. So that's kind of in play. But we've always been a short-term shelter, get people in, help them clear the path to get a job, whether that's sometimes they need their vital documents, sometimes they need training, sometimes they just need help filling out the applications and coordinating transportation, and then helping them save and start getting rental ready to be a tenant again. And so there's a lot of curriculum that goes into helping those families reset. It for people who are housed and are, from middle class, or higher, it can sometimes feel like, what are you actually teaching these people? What are you actually doing? But if people were to like think back to their high school experience, think back to their own family experience, they probably had someone that was setting the example of how to pay bills, setting the example of how to get a job, how to apply for a job, setting the example of stability. And when people get to us in family shelter, they've had multitude of failures along the way. And so it's hard oftentimes to kind of dissect exactly that it's one problem. And so our job is really to dissect the problem, help stabilize the situation, and train them on that specific issue that they're stumbling over to so that they can be successful in the future. We're kind of like that, the dining room table, conversation that you probably had growing up or that I've had with my daughters, right? Of like, how do you be a good, productive adult? It's not, believe it or not, it's not intuitive. It has to be learned. And so, yeah,
A
I'm
lot of
dealing with
lessons
college
learned
kids.
since
Yeah, I've got
2018. I can tell you that much. Uh,
exactly, like they take on too much debt. I've got, three college students in my life, and there are real practical conversations of like, this is a bad decision because XYZ, right? There's a large population that doesn't have the benefit of that counsel. And so that's where we end up later in life, really kind of backtracking on those formative skills and information. And so that's the kind of training, we will have a partnership on job training. We have, trained staff and trained curriculum on how to manage money, how to look for an apartment, how to get a bank account. And not to be too grim, but the fires in California are really an example of people, a large population, no fault of their own, are all of a sudden homeless, right? So what's happening now are there agencies being set up to teach homeowners and to teach people how to move through the market, how to go get money from their insurance company, right? Until you've done it, you don't know, right? That's the same thing with this population that we're talking about. Until they've done it successfully and have that support and wraparound services, you don't really know what you don't know. So that's what we're there, is to fill in those gaps.
mhm. Now, while you're here, I kind of wanted to get a general read on you from the seasonal communities designation and a couple of other stuff. I wanted to highlight as well some new affordable rentals that have been popping up. Like we had LeClaire Village just opened up in Mashpee. We even had some senators down here, some legislators down here to talk a little bit more about that. So that's been very exciting. But before we move on, is there anything else you want to highlight about Hack's goals for 2025? Some of the stuff you're most excited for this year?
Well, the last project I want to update you on is our Orleans housing development. So we've been talking about, one end of the spectrum, people are homeless, very fragile, need a lot of services. But there's the other end of the spectrum of people who just need a place to live, right? But let me just be clear, all housing and homelessness can be cured with housing, right? It's not magic. People just need places to live at the right price, the right size, and the right location. It's not a big mystery. We like to make it more complicated. So on the other side of the equation, we are always trying to figure out how to add inventory and to make sure we have a continuous pipeline to add inventory. And today, right now, in fact, my team is at our site at 107 Main Street in Orleans, waiting for the trucks to deliver the modular boxes. Very exciting. We're doing modular construction in Orleans for 14 units. They are all 80% AMI and under. And so that's considered workforce housing. 80% AMI means that you are making money. It can be, like $80,000 a year, if I'm remembering the numbers off the top of my head correctly. AMI is a complicated equation, Grady, because it depends on the size of the household and blah blah blah. So
Oh, I
if you
understand,
have,
Elise.
you know,
As,
right?
as a reporter trying to report on this for
Yeah,
quite some
trying to
time now.
talk about it. It's
Uh,
hard to bottom line or simplify. But my recommendation is if people are interested, because it is 70% local, there'll be a lottery in the spring. 70% go to locals first. People should go to our website at haconcapecod.org and check out our lotteries. We have several lotteries going on right now. This one will be coming up. It's in Orleans. We're very excited about this project. It's been several years in the making. It's a redevelopment, technically an infill development. So it used to be a Masonic lodge, a really old, ugly brick building in my town. I live in Orleans. Um, we knocked that building down and we're building an old style farmhouse. So it looks and fits in with the streetscape of the other old houses on the street and just goes back deep, not up high. So it goes back deep on the lot and you can fit in 14 apartments. So very excited about that. That's not a typical development, right? That a developer would come in to do because it's small, they're hard to fund. You got to really put all the pieces together. It takes more time than doing like a tax credit project that's bigger.
Mm.
So that is really exciting that we just continue to be focused on development and adding inventory. We're very proud of that work.
As someone who grew up Eastham, Orleans, went to school there, on the nature of that old building that you guys knocked down and its
Yeah.
appearance, no comment. No, that's all I'm gonna say. So yeah, while you're here, we're about coming up on time, but I just kind of wanted to hit mostly this new seasonal communities designation. There's been a lot of interest in that. Basically, that's just like for Cape Cod, to be able to get more money for affordable housing, both with like loans and grants and all kinds of other things. There's been conversations from people who are like part-time residents who are like interested in also having a seat at that table. Are you guys plugged into that? There's been some committees forming. Are you keeping your fingers on the pulse? Do you feel like it's a good maneuver for the state to kind of have this new designation, or do you think it's kind of like maybe a bit of a distraction? What are your opinions? What have your thoughts been on this new seasonal communities designation?
I have been working on the seasonal communities designation since the Baker administration. So I am very pro the seasonal designation. And I'll tell you why, because when we are competing at the state level for funding, we are often competing with projects that have 300, 400 units. And on the Cape, we've got 40, right? We have very small developments. So when a funder is looking at, do I give money to 400 units or do I give money to 40 units? They're often going with the 400 because they're helping more people, right? Kind of makes sense. What I've been saying, what my and thankful for Senator Sear, he really picked this up when he became the senator and ran with this. And there was a group of us working on getting it through the Healy administration when she first came on. You may remember I was on her transition committee. I brought it back up there that we needed to have the special designation, and the senator really ran with it, and he's really should be credited for the reason it got across the finish line in the Affordable Homes Act bill. But what it does, let me back up. What it does is it helps to identify the real market difference for us in our region in buying and building and renting housing. Right? We're hearing everyone say now they have a housing crisis. Well, we've had it for 20 plus years. So it's exacerbated, then COVID exacerbated it again. But the real issue for us is that when you have a house come up for sale, it's not equal to equal incomes or people buying it. Our buyers are off Cape. This could be their second, third, or fourth house. They're all cash buyers. So there is a discrepancy. We are displacing locals faster than we're building housing so that they can stay here and maintain our economy and our communities and our infrastructure and our schools. And it's a huge disadvantage. And what I had asked for from the Baker administration is, couldn't we model this after the gateway communities? Right? There's a lot of special funding, support, consultants. There's special things that they get because the idea is that, and it's very true that, Black and brown people have had huge disparity and a disadvantage in housing, and they have lost out on generational wealth, and they have lost out on the opportunity of home ownership So gateway cities are intended to add extra funding so that this population has an opportunity for home ownership. There's a program called the Commonwealth Builders that is a buy down of a new housing unit that is for home ownership, where the deed restriction wears off after 15 years, so that the person living in it can then have that generational wealth. Right? It's transformative. It's really, really innovative, but it's only available in gateway cities. And what we've been advocating for is we have the same disparity, looks different, and feels a little bit different, but it's very real. We are setting our populations up that live here in rural America, rural Cape Cod, to have that same kind of disparity and displacement and loss of generational wealth for a community that they built, right? This Cape Cod is because of the people. The Cape Cod is built on the backs of locals, fishermen, artists, teachers, police, creative economy, right? Like it's so we can't lose track of that. So that's really what the seasonal communities designation was, is to amplify the needs and provide resources for those of us who live in towns where the seasonal homeownership is at a higher proportion than other places in the state. You know, we have some towns that has 30, 40, 50, 60% of your homes are seasonal homes. That really has a detrimental impact on the whole community and the whole economy, right? There's pros too. I don't want to, be one-sided about this, but the reality is our future of Cape Cod, the future for our children, the future of this society is really about the housing that we can build from here forward for the next generation, for the people who are housing, insecure and who there might be some instability. It's not for those of us who are securely housed now. Honestly, it's not for those of us who are 60 and over. It's really for the future. And that's why we are so adamant at Housing Assistance to where we can appropriately build, to bring the resources to bear, and to make sure that we stay on that side of history of adding inventory. And seasonal communities will be one of those tools, and a very, very important tool that towns and our communities can leverage.
All right, awesome, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation, but I'm afraid we're about coming up on time. Is there anything else you wanted to highlight for our listeners before we wrap up?
No, we have a lot of lotteries going on. Please go to our website. We have a lot of resources. Please go to our website. Please reach out if you need help or you have questions or you want to get involved. HAConcapecod.org.
All right, awesome. For those who are interested, listening to this segment up on CapeCod.com or over the airways, we will have a link to that in the description for for this segment as well, for Sunday Journal up online on CapeCod.com. So, Alisa, thank you so much for joining me. It has been a pleasure, and we'll catch up again soon.
Look forward to it.
I'm Grady Culhane, the CapeCod.com News Center, and thank you for listening.